Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Genoa City had seen its fair share of shocking returns, buried secrets and family revelations that changed everything overnight, but the air felt different this time, heavier, charged, as if the city itself was bracing for something that would ripple through every family, every boardroom, every relationship that had been carefully built over the years. And at the center of it all, though he had no idea yet, was Holden Novak. Holden stood near the window of his suite, staring out at the skyline of Genoa City like he was trying to read its secrets. He'd always been good at reading people, situations, leverage, but lately something had been off. A quiet, nagging feeling he couldn't shake, like pieces of his own life didn't quite fit together. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. His father's death had left a hole in his life years ago. Cancer, brutal, final, he'd grieved, he'd moved forward, and he'd built himself into the man he was now, calculated, composed, and fiercely independent. But lately, memories had started surfacing. Little inconsistencies, little gaps. Things he used to ignore. Things he couldn't ignore anymore. Because now, Genoa City was buzzing with news that two people from the past were about to return. Malcolm Winters, Dr. Stephanie Simmons, and no one yet knew just how explosive their return would truly be. At Crimson Lights, Lily Winters sat across from Devon, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. She hadn't touched it in minutes, her mind was elsewhere. "You're quiet," Devon noted gently. Lily forced a faint smile. "I'm thinking." "That's never a good sign." She exhaled. "Dad is coming back." Devon leaned back slightly, processing that. Malcolm. Just saying the name out loud stirred old memories, complicated ones, emotional ones. Malcolm Winters wasn't just any man returning to Genoa City. He was family, he was history, he was unfinished business. "And not just him," Lily added. "Stephanie Simmons is coming back too." Devon raised an eyebrow. "Now that's interesting." Lily nodded slowly, unease flickering in her eyes. "They're saying it's going to have lasting implications for the entire city." Devon's expression shifted. "That sounds like a warning." "Exactly." Across town, Nate Hastings was reviewing medical reports when he got the notification. His jaw tightened as he read the press release confirming Malcolm and Stephanie's multi-episode return. His cousin instincts kicked in immediately. Family returning was never simple in Genoa City, especially when it involved Malcolm. Nate leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "What are you two coming back for?" he murmured under his breath. Because Malcolm Winters didn't just show up without a reason. And neither did Stephanie Simmons. Meanwhile, Holden had no idea his life was quietly moving toward a collision course, with a truth so massive it would rewrite his entire identity. He picked up an old photograph from his nightstand. It showed him as a child with the man he had always called his father. The man who raised him. The man who loved him. The man who died believing he was Holden's biological parent. Holden stared at the photo longer than usual. "You were my father," he whispered softly. But for the first time in his life, the words didn't feel as solid as they used to. At the Genoa City Athletic Club, whispers were already spreading. "Did you hear?" one socialite murmured. "Malcolm and Stephanie together back in town." "That can't be a coincidence." "It never is." Victor Newman, standing nearby, overheard enough to become intrigued. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Because in his experience, secrets that stayed buried for decades didn't come back quietly. They exploded. And when they exploded, they changed power dynamics, loyalties, and family legacies forever. Days later, a sleek car pulled into Genoa City. Malcolm Winters stepped out first. Still charismatic, still confident, still carrying that unmistakable presence that had once captivated the entire city. Behind him, Stephanie Simmons emerged, elegant and composed, though her eyes carried something deeper. Regret. History. Secrets. They exchanged a brief glance. "This city hasn't changed," Malcolm said. Stephanie's voice was softer. "Oh, it has. We're just the ones who left it frozen in time." Malcolm studied her carefully. "You're nervous." She hesitated. "Yes." Because she knew something Malcolm didn't. Something she had carried alone for decades. Something that could shatter more than one life if it came out. Back at society, Lily froze when she saw Malcolm walk in. For a split second, time stopped. "Daddy!" Malcolm's face lit up instantly. "Lily." They embraced, and though the moment was warm, emotional, and long overdue, there was tension beneath it, the kind that came from years of distance and unresolved questions. "You look incredible," Malcolm said, pulling back to look at her. "So do you," Lily replied softly. Her eyes then shifted to Stephanie, who stood a few feet away. Stephanie smiled gently. "Hello, Lily. It's been a long time. Too long." And the silence that followed carried the weight of things unsaid. Elsewhere, Holden entered the same restaurant moments later, unaware that destiny had just walked through the door ahead of him. His gaze swept the room casually, and then stopped. For no reason he could explain, his eyes locked on Stephanie. A strange feeling hit him. Sharp, immediate, unsettling. Stephanie, sensing something, turned slightly. And the moment her eyes landed on Holden, the color drained from her face. Her breath caught. Malcolm noticed instantly. "Stephanie, what is it?" She didn't answer right away, because she was staring at a man who looked hauntingly familiar. The shape of his jaw, the eyes, the posture. It was like looking at a ghost from her past. Or worse, a truth she had buried. Holden frowned slightly, confused by her reaction. "Do I know you?" he asked politely. Stephanie's lips parted, but no words came out. Malcolm studied Holden more closely now, curiosity growing. "Have we met before?" Malcolm asked. Holden shook his head. "I don't think so." But the air between them had already changed. Charged. Unspoken. Dangerous. Stephanie's hands trembled slightly as memories flooded her mind. A younger version of herself, a secret pregnancy, a decision made in fear, a goodbye she never thought would come back to haunt her. She had convinced herself it was the right choice. She had convinced herself the past was buried. But now, standing in front of a man who looked like a living echo of Malcolm, she wasn't so sure anymore. And deep down, a terrifying thought began to take shape. What if the past hadn't stayed buried at all? What if it had grown up and was now standing right in front of her? Holden shifted uncomfortably under the intense silence. "Is everything okay?" Stephanie forced a smile. "Yes," she said quickly. But her voice betrayed her. And Malcolm noticed. Because Malcolm Winters had always been many things, but oblivious was never one of them. As Holden walked away to his table, Malcolm leaned closer to Stephanie and whispered, "You're shaken." Stephanie's eyes followed Holden across the room. "I need to be sure," she murmured. "Sure of what?" She swallowed hard. "Of something I prayed I would never have to face." And across the room, completely unaware that his entire life story was on the verge of being rewritten, Holden Novak sat down, feeling a strange, unexplainable sense of unease that refused to go away. Like fate had just stepped into Genoa City. And it was heading straight for him. The days that followed Malcolm and Stephanie's return were anything but calm. Whispers spread quickly across Genoa City. Speculation. Curiosity. And an undercurrent of tension that no one could quite explain. But Stephanie could. Because every time she saw Holden, her heart pounded harder. Every time he spoke, every time he moved, every time he smiled, the resemblance became more impossible to ignore. And the guilt she had buried for decades began clawing its way back to the surface. One evening, she sat alone in her suite, staring at an old, worn envelope she had never thrown away. Inside it was a document she had hidden from the world. A birth record. Her hands shook as she opened it. She read the name she had once written with tears in her eyes. The name of a child she had given up. The name she had never told Malcolm about. "Holden," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes. Because the timeline matched. The age matched. And the truth she had spent years suppressing was now staring her in the face with terrifying clarity. Across town, Holden met with Claire, who noticed immediately that he was distracted. "You're off," she said bluntly. "I'm fine, is it?" "You're lying." He exhaled. "That woman, Stephanie, the way she looked at me." Claire tilted her head, "Like she knew you." "Like she recognized me," Holden admitted. Claire crossed her arms. "That's weird." "Yes," he muttered, "very." Meanwhile, Malcolm confronted Stephanie directly. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. Stephanie stiffened. "Malcolm." "No, I've watched you spiral ever since we arrived. You see that man and you freeze. Why?" Silence filled the room. Heavy, suffocating. Finally, Stephanie whispered, "Because I think he might be my son." Malcolm froze. The words hit like a shockwave. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "Is it?" she replied, tears forming. "You and I, before I left town, I was pregnant." Malcolm's eyes widened in disbelief. "You never told me." "I was scared," she cried. "My career, my future, everything was at stake. I gave the baby up. I told myself it was the right thing to do." Malcolm staggered back slightly, absorbing the revelation. "And now you think that baby is Holden Novak?" Stephanie nodded slowly. "And if I'm right," her voice broke, "then he's your son too." The room fell into stunned silence. Because if that was true, everything would change. The next day, Malcolm requested a private meeting with Holden. Holden arrived, cautious but curious. "You wanted to see me." Malcolm studied him closely, emotions warring behind his calm exterior. "Yes, I did." Holden sat across from him. "This feels serious." Malcolm didn't sugarcoat it. "Have you ever questioned who your biological parents are?" Holden blinked, caught completely off guard. "My father died years ago." "I'm not asking about the man who raised you," Malcolm said gently. "I'm asking about your biological father." Silence stretched. For the first time in years, Holden didn't have a confident answer. "I never had a reason to question it," he admitted slowly. Malcolm exchanged a heavy glance with Stephanie, who had just entered the room. Her eyes were already filled with tears. Holden's heart began to race. "What is going on?" he demanded. Stephanie stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Holden, I believe I may be your biological mother." The world stopped. Completely. Utterly. Silence rang in Holden's ears as the words sank in. "That's not possible," he said immediately. Stephanie swallowed hard. "I was pregnant when I left Genoa City decades ago. I gave the baby up for adoption." Holden stood abruptly, shock written all over his face. "You're saying I'm that baby?" Malcolm's voice was steady but emotional. "And if that's true, then I may be your biological father." The room exploded with tension. Holden laughed once, a disbelieving hollow sound. "This is insane." But deep down something clicked. Something terrifying. The timeline. The missing records. The vague answers about his early childhood. All the gaps he never questioned. He looked at Stephanie. Then at Malcolm's. And for the first time he truly saw it. The resemblance. The connection. The truth that suddenly didn't feel impossible anymore. Days later, the DNA results arrived. Lily, Nate, Devon, and several others gathered, sensing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Stephanie's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the page. And then she broke down in tears. Malcolm took the paper from her and read silently. His voice, when it finally came out, was thick with emotion. "It's confirmed." He looked at Holden's. "You're our son." Gasps filled the room. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." Nate stared in absolute shock. "That means—" "Yes," Malcolm said softly. "Holden is Lily's half-brother." "And my cousin," Nate finished, stunned. Holden stood frozen, his entire identity shattering and rebuilding at the same time. His voice was barely a whisper. My whole life I didn't know. Stephanie stepped closer, tears streaming. I never stopped wondering about you, never stopped thinking about the child I gave up. Holden's emotions surged, anger, confusion, disbelief, and something deeper. Pain. You don't get to just show up decades later and rewrite my life, he said, voice shaking. Malcolm nodded solemnly. You're right, we don't, but the truth was always yours. Lily approached slowly, eyes full of emotion. You're my brother, she said softly. The words hung in the air. Powerful. Life-changing. Unavoidable. Holden looked around the room, at Malcolm, at Stephanie, at Lily, at Nate, and realized the reality of it all. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family. A shocking, complicated, powerful family tied to the Winters' legacy. And Genoa City would never be the same again. Because secrets buried for decades had finally surfaced. And the revelation of Holden Novak's true parentage had just rewritten the family map of Genoa City forever. As whispers spread through every corner of the city, one thing became clear. Holden's future was no longer just his own. It was now deeply entangled with the Winters family, their history, their conflicts, and their legacy. And the emotional fallout of this truth was only just beginning.